This is episode 100 of the Death Dhamma podcast. Welcome and thank you so much for being here. Who knew a discussion with Buddhist teachers about death and grief in Buddhism would lead to 3 seasons of a podcast and a 100th episode? Wow! Thank you for being part of the journey. Hi, it's Margaret Maloney and welcome to season 3 of the Death Dhamma podcast. I'm so glad you're here. And I'm so appreciative that you are part of my community. And yet, I seek not to be attached to the idea of the podcast or even to the idea of our community. And that's our topic this season: attachment, clinging, and aversion. What happens when we really want something? What happens when we really don't want something? And what does it do to our suffering and dissatisfaction? Let's dive in and find out a little bit more with today's episode. Current day attachment theory and the Buddhist concept of non-attachment are not the same. That doesn't mean we cannot take a quick look at how they are both active in our lives. In our previous episode, Bill Belanger discussed attachment styles from a perspective of psychiatry and human relationships. Our attachment style comes from our bond with our primary caregivers during our childhood. That's where the influence is for our future social and other intimate relationships, even our relationships at work. In other words, this early bond creates a template or the rules for how you build and interpret relationships as an adult. There are 4 main types of attachment styles: anxious/preoccupied, avoidant, disorganized, and secure. Relationships with someone with a secure attachment style are based on honesty, tolerance, and emotional closeness. Although someone with this attachment style often thrives in their relationships, they don't fear being on their own. This doesn't mean that people with the other styles cannot be happy. It's about understanding yourself and how you connect with others. Also, since I'm not a therapist, I'm not going to go into too much depth about this. To distinguish between this concept and Buddhist attachment, Bill referred to this bond or attachment style as connection. He used the word connection, how we connect with others. And as humans, we are going to connect with others, absolutely. And Buddhism and avoiding attachment does not mean you don't have connection. It doesn't mean that you don't have important relationships or that you aren't dependent on others or that others are not dependent on you. It means being aware of unskillful attachment. So you're going to have these connections and you're going to bond with people and you're going to care about them and you're going to have some type of attachment. If you're concerned about how you are connecting with others, mindfulness is such an important tool because you will observe yourself and what you are feeling in your connection. How does it feel when it takes someone you love too long to answer a text? Beginning with this type of awareness combined with an understanding of your way of connection and what triggers it is a useful way of consistently drawing on a secure attachment style or way of connection. You might have a certain way most of the time, but don't forget about impermanence. Your way of connecting might change from moment to moment or based on the relationship and your perceptions around the relationship. One way of framing this is that the time you spend in meditation and contemplation can make you aware of the way in which you behave that can lead to suffering. And your attachment style or way of connections can definitely lead to suffering. When you are off the cushion and interacting with others, mindfulness will help you identify how your way of connecting is rising and falling as you navigate your relationships with yourself and others. The suttas do not discuss attachment style, and they don't, map out anxious and preoccupied, avoidant, disorganized, and secure. We can certainly make a case that the suttas are teaching us that to develop non-attachment in a skillful way is to step away from anxious or preoccupied, avoidant or disorganized attachment styles, as those are the least desirable, and it is harder to be calm and have peaceful, clear-minded relationships when we are in those styles. And so I would say the secure style is probably the closest to mapping to Buddhist non-attachment. And although the suttas don't map this out, in the suttas you can find stories of monks and their relationships with other monks, and lay people and their relationships with other people, and relationships between husbands and wives, parents and children. And as some of these stories are told, although they're not told for the purpose of mapping out attachment styles, you could probably go through them and begin to see that some of these stories are showing us instances where the participants do not have a secure way of connecting or secure attachment style. So an example that we could consider, King Sudana, the father of the Buddha. You know from the story that when the Buddha was born, or when Siddhartha was born, because that was his name, that the prophecy was that Siddhartha would either become a great warrior king or a great spiritual leader. By the way, Siddhartha's father, Sudana, may have been more like a great clan leader than a king, but most stories you'll find today will identify him as a king. That's great. He was in charge of the clan. It was a large group of people, the Shakya clan, right? King, royal leader, good enough. So Sudana does everything he can to prevent his son, Siddhartha, from seeing the real world, because he doesn't want him to go become a great spiritual leader. He wants him to become a great warrior king. And by hiding the world from him and giving him everything, he thinks he can prevent his son from running away and becoming a spiritual leader. Except what happens? Siddhartha, despite his father's unhealthy attachment, he runs away and he becomes a spiritual leader. By hanging on tightly, his father created the outcome he so wanted to avoid. And I bet some of you can relate to that, where maybe you've had relationships where you tried to hang on to someone so tightly that they went away, or perhaps somebody tried to grab onto you so tightly and keep track of you, and you were like, nope, bye-bye. Anyway, the story has it that when Siddhartha ran away, Suddhodana sent some of his own men to search for his son. By some accounts, searching for his son for 7 years. That's some good, solid hanging on there. And that when Dad, Suddhodana, learned of his son's enlightenment, he sent a group to ask him to come back home. And then what really happened was Siddhartha, now the Buddha, converted all those people who came to try to bring him back home. What connection style is this? Well, it's not secure. If Suddhodana had not tried to control the outcome, he would have been coming from a place of non-attachment, which his son would later teach, or a secure attachment style, an idea which would come, a couple of thousand years later. If Suddhodana had a secure attachment style, would Siddhartha still have run away and realized the middle way and reached enlightenment and taught us about the truth of suffering? It might be fun to theorize, but I had a history teacher once who would say things like, don't write me a paper about what would have happened if the war had changed, or somebody had won the war, if a different group had won the war, don't write me that paper because it didn't matter and it didn't happen and you can't prove it. So same thing here. Might be fun to theorize what would have happened, but it doesn't matter because Siddhartha did run away. He did become enlightened, become the Buddha. He did realize the middle way, and he did teach the Four Noble Truths. I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions, your own stories about attachment. So follow this link, I'm going to read it to you in a minute here, to leave me a 90-second message with your ideas and suggestions. You can go to https://www.speakpipe.com/death_Dhamma_podcast. I suppose you could also just use your favorite search engine to say SpeakPipe Death Dhamma Podcast. And there you can record an audio message for me. And be sure to come over to margaretmaloney.com. That's MargaretMeloni.com and join the community. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Maloney. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmaloney.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.